Alright, I'll say, how are you all this evening of your time as you create time to exist? And to you, good day. We begin this interaction this evening of your time with the entitlement, synchronicity and coincidence. Allow us to begin with a reminder of the understanding that although you do perceive yourself individually, collectively, everything that you perceive is in fact all one event. Creation is simply one event, although within the parameters of creation there is the seemingness of many individual events. However, they all fall under the category of everything. All one thing, fundamentally speaking. Therefore, you may understand with that simple notion that everything is truly related, interrelated. The idea of synchronicity is understanding the synchronization, the intermeshing, the interrelatedness of all events. Understanding that by definition, within what you would label existence, nothing is extraneous. There are no pointless or extraneous creations. By definition, if something exists, it exists and therefore would not be considered extraneous. Synchronicity is always in motion, always existing. Everything is, in fact, synchronicity. And your recognition of synchronicity or the interrelatedness of everything begins to allow you, in that sense, to control, or shall we say, create your reality in a conscious way. For you then begin to use everything to, in that way, your advantage. And by not labeling that certain things are extraneous, they will not have a seeming extraneous effect upon you. You begin to use everything that you do create. When you will not recognize in that way that everything is synchronicity, it still is. However, you are not then choosing yourself to allow yourself awareness of this. And you may label, when individuals refuse to acknowledge synchronicity, because they are still experiencing it is negative synchronicity. For again, when refusing in that way to acknowledge it, things seem to be random. Things seem to slip in there. Things seem to not belong. And you seriously do create that seemingness within your life. Seeing things as extraneous, which does not allow you to glean some positive service from them. The idea of positive synchronicity is beginning now to realize that, in fact, everything is synchronicity. There are no accidents. A saying in your society is that everything has a reason. Everything has a purpose. You may, if you wish, define that it does not, and it still will. This does not always mean, in any given situation, that you need have a conscious recognition of its purpose. You may, and if in fact you do, then that will be relevant to you. But even though everything has a reason, a meaning, there are relative degrees of significance to each and every individual. If there are many individuals involved in an event, a particular nuance of it may seem to have nothing to do with you, but will have more relative significance to someone else within that interaction. And by definition, your being there enhances that interaction, is part of the synchronicity of the interaction. So you can now begin to realize that many of the things of which we speak will boil down colloquially again to two simple notions. Everything is synchronicity. That recognition would be number one. Number two, however, is by now allowing yourself to recognize that everything is synchronicity, to begin to act with your excitement as a guide, with integrity on the opportunities that synchronicity does bring you. Once again, that you cease to judge that something is extraneous, you begin to look at why you have created it and thereby glean from it. Allow it to be of service to you. You are then acting on the opportunities that synchronicity brings you, which then generates more conscious recognition of synchronicity. And therefore, everything is synchronicity. Act upon the opportunities that synchronicity brings you, then leads you back to one, which leads to two, back to one, back to two, on into infinity. Now, in your society, you have a word, coincidence. And very often you do, in that sense, define that word to mean by accident, or by mistake, or just a coincidence, as you say. However, breaking the word down more precisely, coincidence is a description of synchronicity. For co-incidences are incidences happening at the same time. Synchronicity. When you realize that everything is connected, you do not necessarily need analyze how it is connected. Because you do create the idea of time, it may not always be apparent, because you also create the idea of timing. So again, you do not need conscious recognition of every little detail in order to understand that it still all has a meaning. And the things which are consciously recognizable as having a particular meaning are the ones you need know within that timing. However, the others have just as much meaning and will either unfold to you as why they existed, or again be more relevant to someone else within that interaction. When you begin to follow your excitement, when you begin to validate who it is you are, recognizing that it is important and that what excites you by acting upon it is a validation of who you chose to be, you begin to generate synchronicity in a conscious way. And the fulfillment of your desires happens by coincidence. Very often things which seem to have nothing to do with the particular exciting things that you are doing wind up being the things that bring you the results. Therefore, the results of your desires being fulfilled far more often than you being able in that way to predetermine or expect what they will be, will happen by coincidence. And when you begin to generate your creatorhood in this way, it becomes most obvious. But it is all a matter of trusting in synchronicity. Again, as a slight review, doubt is not a lack of trust. Doubt is an infinite trust in a reality you do not prefer. And you can therefore take this approach of trust, which you are very good at, and apply a trust in synchronicity. And that would go in any given situation something like this. Something comes along which in your past you would have labeled and perceived to be negative, extraneous, not belonging. Simply you can, if you wish, it will always be your choice. Trust that it is synchronicity. That there is some reason for it being there. If you will even take this meager approach, you will allow yourself the opportunity to glean what that positive reason is. When you begin to use all your creations in this way, they transform. Symbols don't hang around. Once you get the message, they transform. If things seem to repeat, you are not getting the message. And you can at any time decide to give it a different label. If you keep giving it the same label and it keeps coming back, guess what? That is not the label. That is the reason for the existence of the symbol. So by realizing that everything is synchronicity, you begin to glean positive meaning from all your creations. The only reason that you allowed, in that way, negative seeming creations in the first place was by not having a recognition of synchronicity. You do not act upon the opportunity synchronicity brings. And therefore, life begins to seem to happen to you. And when it does, you then accept and allow that your creations will be equally positive and negative, and therefore begin to allow negative seeming creations into your life. What we are saying is that you can transform this in any given moment by taking it back and recognizing that everything is synchronicity. When you begin to use all your creations, even the negative seeming ones, and they transform, you will then, by continuing to understand synchronicity, not unconsciously create more negative circumstance. So it is not that as you expand into higher consciousness, you will simply be relabeling negatives for your whole life, and in that sense seeming to fool yourself. You will actually see the diminishment of what you have labeled bad in its effects upon you. It will always boil down to your personal experience. You may be very aware of negative scenarios that others are undergoing, but they will not affect you in your life experientially. And the simple recognition of this is all it takes in that way to begin one moment at a time to recognize, validate, and act upon the opportunities that synchronicity brings you. There are no accidents. Every little detail you perceive has some reason for existing. Down to the atom, down to the color of your shirt. Everything. Again, there are relative degrees of significance, and you may not be able to consciously analyze the reason for everything. But when you will simply begin to trust in the mechanism of synchronicity and act that way, you will, I guarantee you 100%, see the results. You never will see them unless you allow this type of reality. Unless you take back your ownership of your reality. And it is that simple. Therefore, being that everything is synchronicity, it is no accident that each and every one of you are here for this interaction. There is some relative degree of significance for you being within any interaction. However, we function from conscious understanding of synchronicity, and thereby our interactions tend to attract individuals that will be served most greatly due to our trust in synchronicity. Therefore, keep your ears open. Even if a question is being asked by someone else, it is no accident that you are here to hear it. There is some degree of significance to you, and you can, if you will allow yourself, glean from every exchange, every interaction, something that is relevant to you, that you contain, that can serve you. You can carry this into the rest of your life, and you can proceed from this moment forward with the conscious recognition of synchronicity. For your willingness to allow us to swim in the sea of your individual and collective consciousness. I therefore thank you most unconditionally and ask you now how I may be of service to you.